Think about the last time you heard a fire truck speeding down the street. You probably didn't even look up. You just moved your car out of the way and went on with your day. We take it completely for granted. If your kitchen catches on fire, you dial 911, and within minutes, trained professionals show up. They don't ask for your credit card. They don't check your bank account. They don't demand to see your insurance policy before turning on the water. They just put out the fire. It is one of the most fundamental, unquestioned social contracts in modern American life. But here is something that might genuinely shock you. For the first several decades of American history, that social contract simply did not exist. At all. If your house caught on fire in Boston or New York in 1820, there was no permanent, government-funded fire department coming to save you. No 911. No safety net. So, what actually happened? Did they just stand there and let your house burn to the ground? The answer is darker, more violent, and far more corrupt than you could possibly imagine. Because early American firefighting wasn't a public service. It was a cutthroat, profit-driven, bare-knuckle business. It was an industry run by insurance companies, street gangs, and extortionists who literally put a price tag on your survival. If you didn't have the right piece of metal bolted to the front door of your house, the firemen wouldn't just refuse to put out the flames. They might actually pull up a chair, crack open a bottle, and watch your entire life turn to ash. The story of how America went from that brutal, mafia-style extortion racket to the public fire departments we have today is one of the bloodiest and most revealing chapters in American history. It is a story about greed, gang warfare, and the terrifying realization that some things simply cannot be left to the free market. Let me take you back to a time when your life was only worth saving if someone was getting paid to do it. To understand how this crazy system started, we have to look at one of America's most famous founding fathers, Benjamin Franklin. We usually picture Franklin flying a kite in a thunderstorm or drafting the Declaration of Independence, but Franklin was also a shrewd businessman. In 1752, he looked at the wooden, tightly packed houses of Philadelphia and saw an opportunity. Fires were a constant, terrifying threat. So, Franklin helped launch the first successful fire insurance company in the American colonies, called the Philadelphia Contribution Ship. The concept was simple. Homeowners paid into a shared pool of money. If your house burned down, the pool covered your financial losses. But there was a catch, and it was a massive one. Franklin's company, and the dozens of rival insurance companies that popped up after it, didn't just pay out claims. They also funded their own private fire brigades. These brigades had one job, and one job only: protect the property of the people who paid their specific insurance company. So, how did the firemen know which houses to save in the middle of a chaotic, smoke-filled night? They used something called a fire mark. When you bought insurance, the company would bolt a heavy, cast-iron plaque directly onto the front of your house. It was essentially a physical logo. Franklin's company used a plaque shaped like 4 crossed hands. Other companies used fire hydrants, trees, or eagles. That metal mark was your lifeline. It was the only thing standing between you and total ruin. When a fire broke out, the alarm bells would ring, and private fire brigades would race through the streets. But they weren't rushing to be heroes. They were rushing to check your front door. If your house didn't have their specific logo bolted to the brick, you were completely out of luck. Imagine the sheer terror of this system in action. You wake up in the middle of the night to the smell of thick, choking smoke. You run outside in the freezing cold, watching the roof of your home catch fire. Suddenly, you hear the clatter of horse hooves and ringing bells. A private fire brigade arrives, pulling a heavy water pumper. You feel a massive wave of relief. You are saved, but the fire captain doesn't yell for water. Instead, he walks up to your front door and shines his lantern on the brick wall, looking for a fire mark. He squints, shakes his head, and turns to his men. "Sorry, boys," he yells. "They are insured by the Green Tree Company. We work for the Mutual Assurance Company." And then, they simply pack up their gear. They don't leave, though. They just pull their wagons across the street, sit down on the curb, and literally watch your house burn to the ground. It was not their job to save you. Their only job was to protect their own company's bottom line. Now, what if multiple brigades showed up to a house that did have the right mark? This is where the money changed everything. Insurance companies didn't just pay regular wages. They paid massive cash bonuses, a bounty, to the very first fire company that successfully hooked up to the water supply and put out the flames. On paper, this sounds like a brilliant capitalist idea. It gave firemen a huge financial incentive to get to the fire as fast as humanly possible. But in reality, Tying survival to a cash bounty created a total nightmare. Because when you put a bag of cash on the line, it stopped being a rescue mission. It became a violent, winner-take-all street war. By the mid-1800s, American cities like New York, Philadelphia, and Baltimore were exploding in size. Thousands of wooden buildings were packed tightly together. Fire was a daily, terrifying threat. But the men racing to put out these fires were no longer just neighborhood volunteers. They had transformed into something entirely different. They had become street gangs. Because insurance companies paid a cash reward to the first crew that put water on the flames, the competition turned absolutely ruthless. The firehouses became social clubs for tough, working-class men. They took a deep, obsessive pride in their fire companies. They gave themselves intimidating names. They wore bright, custom uniforms. And they absolutely hated each other. When the fire bell rang, it wasn't just a race to save a building. It was a race for money, glory, and turf. Rival fire companies would sprint through the crowded, muddy streets, pulling incredibly heavy, hand-pumped fire engines behind them. And what happened if two rival companies reached an intersection at the exact same time? They didn't politely take turns. They dropped their hoses and started throwing punches. Right in the middle of the street, while a family's house was blazing just a few blocks away, dozens of firemen would brawl with brass knuckles, wooden clubs, and even knives. They would try to smash each other's equipment, flip over the rival team's wagons, or completely destroy their water hoses. To these men, beating the rival gang was often more important than actually putting out the fire. They wanted the cash bounty, and they wanted the neighborhood respect. The people trapped inside the burning building were just an afterthought. And the tactics were about to get even dirtier, thanks to a specific group of men who earned one of the most infamous nicknames in American history. To guarantee they got the insurance money, these fire gangs had to secure the water supply first. In cities like New York and Baltimore, water came from wooden fire plugs located on the street corners. You needed water to win the bounty, so the gangs invented a brilliant, yet incredibly vicious strategy. When the fire alarm rang, they didn't just send their heavy, slow-moving water pumpers. They sent their youngest, fastest, and most violent street fighters sprinting ahead of the main crew. Their only mission was to find the closest fire hydrant to the burning building and capture it. These men would grab a large wooden barrel, flip it upside down over the fire plug, and literally sit on top of it. They would guard that water supply with their lives, wielding heavy wooden clubs, bricks, and brass knuckles. If a rival fire company showed up to the scene first, these men would fight them off, refusing to let anyone access the water until their own gang's fire engine finally arrived. Because they were notoriously violent and guarded the fire plugs, these thugs earned a legendary nickname, the Plug Uglies. They were so brutal that the term eventually became a popular nickname for any violent American street gang. Think about how insane this reality was. A family's home is engulfed in roaring flames. Children are crying in the street. The roof is slowly caving in. The water needed to save them is sitting right there on the corner. But no one can use it, because a gang of thugs is sitting on a barrel, busting heads to protect their payday. It was absolute chaos. But the violence over water wasn't even the worst part. Soon, these fire gangs realized they had another way to make money. A way that was pure, unfiltered extortion. Let's say you didn't have insurance. No metal fire mark bolted to your front door. Or maybe you did, but the wrong gang showed up first. What happens next? This is where the early firefighting business turned into a straight-up mafia shakedown. The fire captain would walk up to you as your living room went up in flames. He wouldn't offer sympathy. He would offer a negotiation. He would demand an outrageous amount of cash, right there on the spot. If you couldn't pay, or if you tried to haggle, he would simply cross his arms and let the fire spread. They literally held your home for ransom while the clock was ticking. But let's say you did pay them. Or let's say your insurance company's gang finally won the street brawl and started putting out the fire. You think your nightmare is over, right? Wrong. Because fighting fires wasn't their only source of income. Looting was. When these gangs rushed inside a burning building to rescue your belongings, they often just robbed you blind. They would carry out your silver, your jewelry, and your expensive furniture, but somehow, those high-value items would mysteriously disappear into the night. It was an open secret in major American cities. Firemen were often just legally protected thieves. Sometimes, if a rival gang was successfully putting out a fire, another gang would purposely slice their water hoses with a knife just to make them fail. The goal was to make the other company look bad, even if it meant an entire city block burned to ashes. The system was completely broken, Greed and corruption had turned public safety into a bloody circus, and in 1835, this exact broken system would trigger a catastrophe so massive it almost destroyed the financial capital of the United States. It is the middle of December in 1835. New York City is freezing. It is the beating heart of American commerce, the center of trade, but it is built almost entirely out of wood. The temperature has dropped below zero. Late at night, a small fire breaks out inside a 5-story warehouse in the wealthy financial district. Normally, this is just another routine chance for the fire gangs to brawl, secure a fire plug, and make a quick buck. But tonight is terrifyingly different. The wind is howling at gale force, carrying deadly sparks from roof to roof. The fire gangs rush to the scene, but their broken, corrupt system instantly collapses under the pressure. Remember those violent, bitter rivalries? While the gangs are busy arguing over territory and fighting for access to the water, the flames multiply. To make matters worse, the East River is frozen solid. Their heavy, hand-pumped engines are completely useless. They try desperately drilling holes through the thick ice, but the freezing water literally turns to solid ice inside their leather hoses. Instead of dropping their rivalries and working together to save the city, the system descends into pure, selfish madness. The firemen are exhausted, disorganized, and freezing to death. Realizing they cannot win, some of them abandon the fight completely. They break into the burning warehouses and just start looting, stealing expensive silk, fine wines, and imported coffee, while the city's wealth turns to ash. The fire quickly grows into a massive, roaring wall of flames, so bright it can be seen from miles away. It isn't just a building burning anymore. It is an unstoppable monster eating the financial capital of the United States. And the wealthy elites who had relied on this corrupt gang-run system were about to pay the ultimate price. The fire raged completely out of control for 2 entire days. It consumed everything in its path. Imagine the richest men in America, the powerful Wall Street merchants, watching helplessly as their massive fortunes evaporated into thick black smoke. They dragged their expensive goods out of warehouses, piling them in the middle of the streets, desperately hoping the freezing winter cold would stop the flames. But the wind simply blew the fire right over them. Even the majestic Merchants Exchange building, the absolute symbol of American capitalism, collapsed into a mountain of rubble. When the smoke finally cleared, the sheer scale of the devastation was hard to comprehend. Nearly 700 buildings were completely destroyed. Roughly 50 acres of the most valuable real estate on the entire planet were gone. The damage was estimated at $20 million, which would be worth billions in today's money. But here is the ultimate, poetic irony of the Great Fire of 1835. Remember those greedy insurance companies? The ones who created this ruthless, profit-driven firefighting system in the first place? The destruction was so massive, and the damage was so overwhelming, that almost every single fire insurance company in New York went completely bankrupt. They couldn't pay out the claims. The very system they built to protect their profits ended up destroying them entirely. The smoking ruins of New York sent a chilling, undeniable message across the rest of the country. The private, gang-run fire system was not just corrupt. It was a literal threat to national survival. Leaving public safety to the free market was a fatal mistake. Something had to change, and the ultimate solution would soon arrive in the form of a loud, terrifying metal beast. After the devastating collapse in New York, city leaders across America realized a terrifying truth. They had to get rid of the violent fire gangs. But how do you replace thousands of tough, brawling street fighters who control the water supply? You don't replace them with other men, you replace them with a machine. The answer came from Cincinnati, Ohio. In 1852, 2 brilliant inventors named Alexander Latta and Abel Schock built something that looked like a monster straight out of a science fiction novel. It was a massive, incredibly heavy, coal-fired steam engine designed specifically to pump water. They named it the Uncle Joe Ross. To understand why this was such a massive revolution, you have to look at how the gangs operated. Their old fire engines were entirely powered by human muscle. It took dozens of strong, exhausted men aggressively pulling heavy wooden levers up and down just to shoot a weak stream of water at a burning building. But the Uncle Joe Ross didn't need muscle. It didn't get tired. It didn't stop to throw punches at rival gangs, and it certainly didn't stop to loot a burning warehouse. As long as it had coal, this mechanical beast could shoot a massive, high-pressure stream of water further and faster than any human crew ever could. For city officials, this steam engine was a miracle. It was the ultimate solution to the city's burning problems. But for the fire gangs, this machine was a strict declaration of war. It was an absolute existential threat to their entire way of life. If a steam engine could do the work of 50 men, the gangs would lose their power, their turf, and their precious extortion money. And these violent men were not about to go down without a brutal fight. The fire gangs of Cincinnati were absolutely furious. They looked at the massive, smoke-belching Uncle Joe Ross steam engine and saw the sudden end of their reign. They weren't just going to pack up their gear and walk away. They decided to destroy it. When the city scheduled the very first public test of the steam engine, the volunteer gangs showed up in full force. They didn't come to watch, they came to riot. They screamed insults, threw heavy rocks, and violently threatened the inventors. They promised that if this metal monster was ever brought to a real fire, they would smash it to pieces in the street. And they meant it. In the early days of steam engines, gangs across the country would secretly sabotage the machines. They would slice the heavy leather water hoses with sharp knives in the dark. They would throw sand into the gears to completely ruin the engine. Sometimes, they would even physically attack the men trying to operate the machine. It was a literal, bloody war between human muscle and mechanical power, but Cincinnati had a secret weapon. The city government did not back down. Instead, they appointed a man named Miles Greenwood to take charge. Greenwood wasn't a soft politician. He was a tough, fearless iron foundry owner who commanded absolute respect in the streets. He was exactly the kind of man who wouldn't flinch if a street gang pulled a knife on him. The city leaders gave Greenwood the ultimate authority. They told him to protect the steam engine at all costs, completely break the power of the violent street gangs, and build a brand new system from the ground up. The days of fighting over fire plugs and demanding extortion money were finally over. Miles Greenwood didn't just fight the gangs, he completely destroyed their business model. On April 1, 1853, under Greenwood's strict leadership, Cincinnati officially established the very first fully paid, professional, public fire department in the United States. This was a massive earthquake-level shift in American history. Greenwood hired tough, disciplined men, paid them a steady government salary, and armed them with powerful steam engines. The rules changed overnight. There were no more insurance bounties, no more violent brawls over fire plugs, no more checking for metal marks on a burning front door. If your building caught fire, these professional men showed up to put it out, plain and simple. When the old volunteer gangs tried to riot and sabotage the new system, Greenwood met them with overwhelming police force. He proved that the giant steam machines could put out fires faster and safer than 100 brawling street thugs. Quickly, the rest of the country realized Cincinnati had solved the ultimate crisis. Other major cities watched the success and followed suit. The era of the corrupt fire gang was finally dead. Public safety was no longer a business, it was a right. Today, when you hear those sirens, you don't think about Benjamin Franklin's metal marks or street gangs fighting while houses burn. You just expect rescue. But that expectation wasn't free. The safety net we trust today was built on top of extreme greed, extortion, and a broken capitalist experiment that literally burned cities to the ground. Sometimes, society only learns when the ashes are too deep to ignore. If this story changed how you look at the world, hit subscribe and like this video. We uncover the hidden machinery of history every single week. See you in the next